Welcome to Everyday Conversations with the Brook. We get to have so many conversations with you so many of you on a weekly basis. And we just love this time where we get to share some of the conversations that we're hearing people talk about and kind of open it up a little bit broader. And so the conversation we want to have today is based around how do we handle and how do we work through conflict in relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And this isn't just like, dating relationships. This is like kind of any relationship. So Benji and Haley are here with us. And so how would you guys say, like, why is having conflict so difficult to go through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what is really helpful when we are approaching the topic of conflict is taking inventory of, is conflict a good or a bad word? In my definition, like in my dictionary, do I associate conflict as being something good or bad? Because conflict itself actually isn't inherently good or bad, but the way that we handle it can be. And so I think all relationships at any point or at some point are going to have conflict, but it's how we respond and how we react to that conflict that can be deemed good or bad. So it's really figuring out your relationship with how do I navigate conflict and how can I use this inevitable thing to better my relationships and not be afraid or avoidant of conflict.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I think it's also hard just because most of us didn't grow up like being taught, how do you handle conflict well? Like most of us didn't come from these family backgrounds where we're just taught how to do it well. So I think that can be challenging too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both those things are good. Like, how do we view it? How have we seen it? I also think it's just hard. Like, I think it's hard to be vulnerable and share, like, hey, what you did hurt me. Like, just having those conversations is really vulnerable and not easy.
Yeah, because you kind of, in a conflict, you have like the what happened, like we can like logically talk through like what happened, like you said, but then like you said, Benji, also there's like, how did it make me feel? And right, like that can be hard to be honest with ourselves and with somebody else, like how what you did made me feel. Mm-hmm. It does really put you in a vulnerable like situation.
Yeah, and I think there's also a benefit to even figuring out like what kind of person are you in a situation of conflict? Because there's like four main kinds of people. There's the forcer who basically like it's their way or the highway. Like they are going to make their point known and it doesn't really matter what happens in the aftermath. Mm-hmm. There's also the accommodators that basically like will do anything just to make the conflict go away that doesn't necessarily feel good to them. There's the avoiders that are similar to the accommodators, but also different because it is avoid, avoid, avoid. Like if you've ever been ghosted when you're having a disagreement with somebody or someone wants to put their head in the sand, like that's avoidant. And is it necessarily healthy? It almost makes the conflict worse because the other side really isn't having anybody's side heard out because it's just avoidant. And then the last one is the compromiser, which this can also be healthy and unhealthy. It's basically finding a middle ground that doesn't necessarily satisfy either sides, but is a compromise for both. Typically, that's the most healthy place to be in that, but that doesn't mean if you're one of these other three that you won't be a healthy person in conflict. But it's helpful to like look at that and be like, okay, when I'm in a situation of conflict, do I run for the hills? Do I like fight for it? Or do I just like compromise or hear them out?
Yeah. No, that's funny you say that. I'm like thinking right now in my brain, like what type of person am I in conflict? And I would probably say I'm either the compromiser or the avoider. Like I'm not like ready to go to bat right away when it comes to conflict. Like I need some time to like think through how I want to react. Yeah. And so that can turn into like avoiding sometimes. But yet like I do want there to be a happy middle ground. But yeah, you're right. Like sometimes that doesn't always happen, right? Mm-hmm. So what about you guys? Like what type of person do you see, yourself in conflict as?
Yeah, Benji, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the typical type 7 on the Enneagram, so I avoid at all costs. And then I got married and realized I couldn't avoid it anymore. And then I think as you learn, I guess I'm looking through them. I'm probably a forcer when because I didn't really grow up knowing how to do conflict. And so now I avoided, then I got married and it's like, I have to have conflict. So then I'm just like forcing
we're doing it.
Yeah. Forcing it. Yeah. And so, it's interesting to think about how how we each handle it. What would you say, Haley?
So I'm an Enneagram 9, but I'm a wing 8. So that is an interesting dynamic. But growing up, I definitely would avoid, because as a 9, that's the peacemaker, which is different than the peacekeeper, because it's an active, like, making peace rather than like avoiding it. And I really leaned into like numbing out, go along to get along. We want to make sure that like everybody's happy, and that's just not healthy. And so as I have gotten older and even just been more in tune with myself, I found that I'm more of the compromiser and at times the forcer. That's that wing 8 coming into play. But typically my heart is to seek peace and to find a neutral ground for that, which feels a lot better, because it also feels like, okay, my feelings are being heard and the other person's are too. And like, especially if you're in conflict with someone that you have deep care for, it's hard and nearly impossible to not see them as an actual person. And that helps you move toward healthy resolution, I think. So
I love what you said. If you are actually having conflict in person, it forces you to see someone as an actual person. Mm-hmm. Conflict over text, conflict over even is not good, right? Like, you can read into situations so much. We dehumanize people when we are not around them. When you're not around somebody you're mad at, you just go from A to B and they're horrible and they become a monster. Yeah. But when you get in proximity helps conflict. It softens you to realize who you're actually talking to, another human being, right? Which I think is really huge. So, so let's transition for a second and just let's get practical. Like, conflict it's not when it's going to happen, or if it's going to happen, it's when. What are some tips, some things that you guys would suggest to help people engage in healthy, productive conflict and conversations?
Yeah. I would say, 1, don't view it as a negative thing. Mm-hmm. I think you need to view it as, okay, how is this going to better me after? Like, even if it sucks at the time, like, it's not every conflict that you go into you have to be like, oh, this is going to be so good, because a lot of the time it just isn't great. Mm-hmm. But when you're able to get at the point where you can reframe it and view it as something that like is going to be beneficial in the long run, I think that's super helpful. Also, just listening, like, see what, like, typically it's not just like, conflict is like an iceberg where what you hit is usually just like the tip of the iceberg, but what's really the issue is below the surface. Mm-hmm. So by listening to the other person and actually hearing like what they're saying, instead of listening for what your response will be, listen for what their words are saying. I think we can really get into the posture of like, I'm going to listen, but just as it like benefits my defense in return. And so I think that, and asking clarifying questions like, hey, like, why did that make you feel bad? Or what did I do? Like, asking those to reframe, and using the language that is, I feel, or it was like this to me, rather than you did this, or you always do that and you never do that. Like, those are such dangerous things to bring into play, because you would hate that if someone said like, oh, you always are doing this to me. And you're like, well, actually, like, no.
Yes. Not using always or never terminology is really huge.
Yeah.
There's a book I absolutely love, and we will put it in kind of the comments underneath, but like, it's called Difficult Conversations. And one thing that I really learned from that book was to go into a conflict, and after you want to talk about it, is being able to own your contribution, right? So everybody contributes something. We all contribute something, even if you think your piece was this small. We all contribute something. So I think to kind of bring down our defenses, I think a good way to start some of those hard conversations is just to share what you contributed, right? Like, we each contribute something. So I think that's really important as well. And going in with a learning mindset, like, okay, I'm going to go in to learn, like, you know what, maybe this person perceived what happened differently than me. I'm not going to go in to prove my point, which is what we often do. Mm-hmm. Instead of going in to prove our point, like, what if we went in to say, like, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn. Let's see, what was your perspective on that? What was my perspective on that? And how can we learn from each other and grow together? So, yeah, anything else you would say, Benji, in terms of tips for how to deal with conflict well?
Yeah, no, I really like that, like, viewing it as it's not perfection, but like, we're practicing this, because a lot of times we're not good at it. It's new for some of us. And so just having that mindset, I think, is really helpful, and trying to create a safe space with the person of like, setting a time, not just like coming at them without them like knowing what's happening. I think there's something about creating a space. And then even personally for you, like maybe not when you're fueled up coming to that person, but actually maybe writing down like, okay, what are my feelings about this? How did they hurt me? Like getting awareness of maybe what that is, and then coming to the person cool-headed and being able to express, where you're hurt. And then at the end, like after you work through an apology and hopefully forgiveness and reconciliation, maybe even asking like, hey, is there anything that I didn't apologize for that you feel like I missed or that I didn't hear you in, and just like creating that dialogue too of safety.
Yeah, I really liked what you said, even about like giving yourself some time and giving the other person some time. This is something that I've been trying to put into practice, because whenever I have disagreements, I just want to get it out of the way. Like now that I'm not avoiding things, I'm like, okay, like if there's not resolution immediately, if there's not reconciliation immediately, then like I'm not going to feel good. And what I learned is that that's actually anxiety at like the root of it, which is wild because I didn't think I was an anxious person. But when it comes to that conflict, it disrupts my desire for peace. And so now like having that healthy, like, okay, taking a step away, like maybe it's writing down your thoughts, or maybe it's just like praying about it and having that be your source of peace rather than the other person's good or bad response to the conflict is so beneficial. So especially if you're the kind of person, or whatever kind of person you are in conflict, recognizing what the other person is too, so that you can both, again, like do conflict well, because it isn't the if, it is the when, and you're going to fight. So how do you fight well?
I like that. I like fighting well, and you're fighting together. I think that's the last thing I would say is remember that, like, if this is somebody that you value, that you're actually on the same team. So how do you fight well, and how do you fight together that you're on the same team when it comes to conflict? So awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing. Thank you for your honesty about conflict. And any good relationship has good conflict. And a lot of times it's people you're closest to, because you care about them the most, you're going to get at them the most. So just remember that. That's one reason I love our simple churches. We have simple church, and we call our simple churches a spiritual family. You know what family does? They sometimes fight, and they sometimes have conflict. And so if you're not in a simple church, I'd encourage you to join. It's a great space to learn how to grow together with people, how to do conflict well with people, so that will continue to prepare you for the rest of your life. So if there's anything that we haven't mentioned here, please put those in the comments below. We'd love to continue to follow up some of those questions that you guys have. And if this has been valuable to you, please make sure that you follow us, that you share this with somebody else, that this would benefit them as well. And we hope that you have an opportunity soon, but not too soon, to do conflict well as well. And we will see you soon.